All right, welcome to episode 1 of the Reverse Engineering Plus Plus Show podcast. Uh, with you today is me, Aaron, and
Me, Dell?
crushed it 2 episodes in a
I,
row.
I wasn't. I wasn't expecting that toss over. I get distracted.
Oh man! So in this episode, we're going to be talking about some post DEF CON 30 wrap up, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and talking about a couple of the interesting talks that saw while we were there, and just random chat about villages. And I'm sure we're off to get bound to get involved in some tangents along the way, knowing us. So first up, I will.
Almost certainly.
First up on the good this year, I will say I thought the badge was really cool. It was made by MK Factor and KTJ Geek Mom. Those are their Twitter handles. And this year they had, I think, 10, like the Village Press, Artist, Human, Contest, Vendor, Speaker, Goon, CFP, and then the Uber badges. And what this one this year was, I think it was the first year that had a musical element to it. Do you want to correct me if I'm wrong there, Dell? Can you think of any other year?
I can't think of. So 23 had a record, but there was really no music on it. It was like a dude talking in Hex or something like that.
Yeah, my memory is vague, but
Can't
you
think of
you
any
might.
musical ones.
I think you're right though. I think the record one, I guess if you want to call it a musical one, I remember at the time because both you and I were in attendance to that one. Everybody was furiously running out to Fry's to pick up a record player.
I remember that. There's a lot of really janky record players there.
I had no idea at that one what was going on. I just hung back basically in the chill out until we found somebody with a record player, and then I think just recorded it straight up on a phone.
I think that's exactly what we wound up doing. I remember like being. I feel like it was in the place with the DJ. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely the chill out lounge.
Uh,
And I think there's a couple other people who were kicking around in there with it too. I feel like that year a lot more people had banded together to try to do it, and versus other years where it's an electronic badge. I think there's a little bit easier of an element to be able to do that kind of solo. There's always a group element involved where you have to interact with the other badges and stuff like that, but I feel like as soon as somebody pulls a flash down and starts playing around with that, nowadays those start getting passed around on the Discord and whatnot, and it's not long before somebody emulates another one. And then not this year, but the year previous, somebody had, it wasn't last year either, it might have been 2 years ago. Anyway, it was the one that Joe Grand, I think, had made with the stone and the personal area, maybe CP2104, a little transceiver on it. And that one, I think it was maybe like 5 hours before somebody had one that could emulate all of the other ones and would just run you through the challenges. It was really quick.
Man,
And,
it feels like that's always like it always happens like that. Like somebody cracks like some small thing or something like that, and then all of a sudden, like it just goes wild pretty much immediately.
and in common ways, I think that's got to be a tremendously hard job to do, especially for an event as big as FCon, is to try to make. Not only are there the manufacturing challenges of trying to source, especially these days with the chip shortage, of getting all of that
Oh,
material and the design work and the months and months of design work that go into it. And then you thought your challenge was going to go a particular way, and then somebody just happened to know an uncommon way, in there, and then breaks open the keys to the kingdom.
yeah, I really don't envy the guys trying to design all that stuff because, like, as somebody who's like tried to like put together training for people and stuff like that before, the number of ways that people can just like randomly come up with to completely go around anything and everything that you were trying to accomplish is just infuriating. So I don't envy those guys. And I don't know how they come up with challenges that are exciting every year and challenging for everybody, but doable as well.
Yeah, I, similar to you, have made some training before, and you are wowed at, man, I thought that those instructions were perfectly crystal clear, but wow, you have impressed me at somehow disregarding literally everything I wrote down there and going about it in just the most sideways manner that you can. It's
Well, not just that, but like how weirdly literal people can get. I wrote for some training for somebody or for a thing one time, and like somebody brought it to me after like 5 minutes and was like, "Yeah, I can't do this," and I was like, "Why not?" And I was like, "Well, like, what am I supposed to do with this CD?" I was like, "You put it in the drive."
yeah, yep, that tracks. And
It's like, all right, well, I'll add that step, I guess.
the this one, to be fair to be fair, um,
To
this
be
one had
fair.
troubles. This one had troubles in that there was when I first turned it on. One of the first things that you just kind of do is a poker of all the buttons is turn it on, fire it up, see what it's capable of. And there was a screen that showed you ways not to connect it up to other things. It had like pictures of configurations, like the audio out to the audio in, and it said no. And then it had one where you connected like four inside of a daisy chain, and it said no. So of course, me, I'm thinking like, oh, they're giving us a cheeky clue as to what to do. So
Yep.
thankfully, somebody caught me before I had started to try and said, no, no, those are legit. You don't do those things. And then it wasn't long before they had a bunch of the posters printed off, the poster boards printed off too, with verbiage under it, which said, yeah, definitely do not do these things. It's not a cheeky joke and fun, and this is how you should be doing the challenge. To, just straight up don't do that. So there was that issue. And there was also another issue where some of the badges, well, the badges were designed to where it actually had good anchor points for the lanyard, which is good because in years past, especially like that one we went to with the records, uh, people were coming up with all sorts of creative ways to wear that because it just there was no way to really easily wear it.
Yeah, the records were the worst. Like I appreciate what they were going for, but man, just the worst idea for a badge.
Fully agree there, and
Like
it's
I
sad
wish
too
3D
that
printers would have been more popular and you could have clipped it in. Sorry.
yeah, no, yeah, and probably if they were that's exactly what would have happened. People still got creative with it, but I agree that may and I hate to say that that's probably one of the lesser loved badges because it was made by Lost, and I think maybe one of the final years, or if not the final year, that he was responsible for doing the crypto challenges. And we're going to talk about him a little bit more later, but um, yeah, he's a stand up guy, and his challenges I think always ended up having that great appeal of here are the goals, and then here are the stretch goals. That the truly motivated can go after. So there was kind of multiple levels at play of the
Yeah.
crypto challenges. But don't get me wrong, those got and the stretch challenges, if you want to call them that, those got really hard really quick, or they did for me, as especially then as somewhat of an uninitiated guy.
So there's definitely some of that. Also, like I just don't know how he found some of the like random like I don't even know what to call it. Just strange things that
Mm-hmm.
he put in there. Like one year he I don't know, like what was it? He managed to find something that was like you couldn't find if you used Google Translate because there was an error in Google Translate for a while that like meant that it translated this one piece of text wrong. So if you used Google Translate to try to do the challenge, it wouldn't work because Google Translate would translate it wrong. You had to like either know the language or translate it with something else, which
Yeah,
almost nobody would naturally do. You know what I mean? Like the second I need something translated, it's translate.google.com for me. So
same.
like I don't know how people figure that stuff out, right? Like I would have just been totally boned.
Yeah, and well, as you probably well remember, we were. Yeah, I think it took a crypto.
I
What
do
was that guy's
remember.
name? What was his handle? Was it Crypto Potato or something? Like, it was something really funny. Who kind of explained it to us towards the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was there
It
was
was definitely something I didn't expect.
there was some. You're right though. I remember that there was some random book. It was like a really rare esoteric book of challenges that he was able to pull that from. Nowadays, for some stuff like what the lanyards were based off, I think it was the gold bug, which they have a whole village now called Gold Bug, but which is involved with the crypto, but not really even knowing that stuff. But now having some CF piece under my belt and stuff like that. I'm sorry, CFP, not CFP, CTFs under my belt. I was looking at another thing talking about Circle City Con, call for papers. Um, but having some CTFs under my belt, I know about the decode.fr now, that great French website, which has, literally every little type of glyph underneath the sun on it, which will allow you to usually make light work of a lot of those crypto type challenges, which use kind of weird or non-standard glyphs. But I wish Lost would really come back. I don't know if they kind of just want to keep it going for giving other people the chance to do it, just like the normal CTF every like 3 years or so. They rotate out the groups that run that. My favorite one so far, definitely, at least for not so much on the challenges, maybe, because they're all the challenges are good and hard, but it was the legit BS, the legitimate business syndicate. In short, it was legit BS. That gave me a good laugh.
The main challenges are usually something I feel like I only get like 10% through, and I'm like, all right, well, I'm pretty stuck. And I don't want to spend my whole con just sitting here doing this only.
Yeah, that speaking of getting stuck, so I was otherwise occupied during a lot of the conference with kind of some official related stuff, so there's that. But man, I went on this extravaganza trying to install Pico tools to be able to pull the firmware from the RP2040 for the board. Well, number one, I thought it was cool that for the badge this year too, kind of going back to what we were talking about there initially, the badge. I thought it was cool that they used repurposed like Raspberry Pi Nano elements to be able to create it. And I do want to play around with that and hack on that a little bit more to be able to hook up other types of sensors and things like that to it. But I had a kind of hardware hacking VM with me, and I had a bunch of tools that I normally use to be able to pull flash and do different things. But what I definitely did not have with me was Pico tools installed on anything. Pico tools are what you can use to be able to interact with the chip themselves over USB. And so there is this other tweet that it reminded me of a little while back where the guy, I think his name was Sawaba, had said, it'll never be the year of the Linux desktop because, you stumble upon something cool on GitHub and then you pull it down and you tackle a 37-step process to set env and export some path variables and get some gems, and then you run Node.js, and you're doing this all just to start like 50K of code. And then you get that going, but the install and build fails. And then you Google that, and then it's like, oh, you're out of version whatever. And then you look in your package manager, and it's not in your package manager. So then you go out and get that other thing, you pull it down, and it says, hey, sorry, you have to install these other things too, which are also not in your package manager. So you Google all of that, and it's like, hey, it appears you're using this version of Python or Go or COBOL, and it's not compatible with your shithead OS distro because of issues for blah 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 with paths and people with dirty auras. So you're considering then, okay, well maybe I can make a VM moving away from my shithead OS to whatever hipster OS it is, or a Docker container. And then eventually you come across some forum somewhere where somebody says, hey, actually, you're wrong. This totally is supported on shithead OS. And you work through that, and you're now 8 hours in, and you just are blinking your eyes as you finally get the console or the thing to look at, and you've got it to run. I ran into exactly that issue on the Ubuntu build that I had with the hardware stuff trying to install Pico tools, only to find out that it's supported in the AUR for Arch. So if I
Which is
would
funny because I feel like Arch
have,
is the master of that thing you just described, right?
oh,
Like, I
100%.
feel like I've always had that trouble with Arch.
The only place where I would want to go to experience that on literally every tool that I ever wanted to install is maybe like Slackware.
Oh God, Slackware. I forgot all about that. Thanks for bringing that up.
So yeah, if you
I
want to
go
have a
torture
bad
myself and
time,
read about that sometime.
or maybe roll your own package manager through the Linux from scratch project, I feel like you'd almost probably have a better time with that than you would probably with Slackware because at least you created it.
Yeah, but also then I got to sit down and take the time to create it, and then like the reality is like I'm not gonna maintain it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah, I totally do know what you
uh,
mean. limited amount of hours and all that. Anyway, though, for the badge, as well, in addition to the don't connect it this way error, there was an error too where I was talking about the clip-on points. Well, part of the metal of the lanyard, if it kind of got on the side of one of the, I think it was audio out ports, it would ultimately end up blowing like some random component that was on your board and it was unrecoverable. And the hardware hacking village quickly ran out of replacement parts to be able to like sub on there. So there were some pretty unhappy con goers. So I guess if we're still in the good category, I would, definitely still, I liked the badge. I liked that you had to do like the musical challenges for it, but maybe could also fall in kind of the bad and the ugly categories too.
Yeah, like maybe I don't know, like right was that good of an idea to release that thing with like so many things where you could just brick it like straight out, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but
And
back
like, yeah, they give you instructions that say, "Hey, don't do that thing." But also, you don't tell people who are at a hacking convention, "Don't do this thing," unless you want them to fucking immediately do that thing. You know what I mean? Like,
I do. But we just also got done saying a little bit earlier, talking about the issue with like, man, it's a challenge. And I'm sure that works on my machine is working just fine for them on their bench without a lanyard attached. So, but
yeah,
there were some people walking around with Kapton tape and stuff like that. Most people, I don't have a firm count on that. So I'm just kind of pulling that out of nowhere. But I think that most people were fine and didn't have any kind of like serious issues. And in any event, MK Factor got on Twitter a little bit later and showed a way if you did blow that component, like a jumper cable that you could hook up to be able to like route around it and still be fine. So it was also very interesting to hear. And at the closing ceremonies they had, everybody kind of turn theirs on and play with it at once. So you can imagine the cacophony of synth sounding little keyboards going on at once. It was interesting, but it was
I
also
mean, that
fun.
sounds kind of great.
Yeah, some people, especially the people who are more inclined to do hardware hacking and stuff, hooked up to the outline and had some amplifiers on there and things like that, and made it to where it automatically played different sounds and tunes and stuff like that. Jeopardy theme sound when like a live demo type situation wouldn't go off. Oh man, but yeah, it's still in the good category. Uh, at the closing ceremony, speaking of, it was wild to see for the first year that the DevOps team in Knox said that there was zero downtime and zero incidents, which I thought was just incredible considering the sheer size of people coming this year. The last
Yeah, it's
one,
a
what were you saying?
no, I was just saying that's a pretty serious brag. I'd have considered at least there to be, you know, like a couple hours of downtime. Not just absolutely nothing.
Especially with people, hackers who would be more than happy to try to bring you down just for the to say, hey, I brought down the network at DEF CON. Or working with the different hotel staff that they had too, you wouldn't imagine, or you'd imagine that there maybe could be some miscommunications that happened there or some sort of issues, but no, like hats off to those teams. There were none, and that's awesome. Also, I think this year there was like north of 14 terabytes of internet traffic, which bested 27's like 12 and some change. So lots more this year. Also, they supported WPA3, which is fully supported, I guess, in Linux and Android. I hadn't really, that little factoid I hadn't heard about. Have you messed around with those at all yet?
I have to admit, I have not messed around with it at all, actually.
Yeah, I kind of, tucked that feather into my cap. I was like, oh man, I got to play around with those a little bit more later. I didn't even really know that they were coming out. So we'll be investigating some of
Same.
that. Also, in news of the good, I thought it was cool they were able to do since a lot of people, I guess, from China weren't able to make it out this year, having travel restrictions due to COVID. They did set up like a 360 VR camera for like a virtual party. And I thought that it was interesting when they described that because at first I balked at it. I was like, a 360 camera, con goers and stuff like that aren't going to like that. But I guess they had set up like blinders on it. They couldn't find like a 180-degree camera. So they ended up setting like a partition to where it was only like on the stage for the speaker and stuff like that. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
That is pretty interesting.
And then another good thing too, the hacker tracker. Man, that app is clutch for being able to understand what's going on where and when, along with having the maps. It gets better every year, and shout out to the info booth team for being able to build that and having an awesome backend that it integrates with. Also, this year I thought was really cool. I randomly happened upon one of the Paranoids badge. Have you heard of the Paranoids before?
I had not. I've been since you linked it to me right and in the Slack channel and everything. I've been like on and off looking at some of that stuff, but and it looked great, right? Like I wish I'd heard of them before, but until you brought them up to me, I was like, Joe, just who are these folks that I've never heard of ever? But their badge looks amazing, right? I'd like 5 of them at least.
Yeah, for those who maybe are listening who are not in the know, the Paranoids is like the security team for Yahoo, which obviously makes sense that they have, a team like that, but you don't hear about them maybe as much as you hear about like, I don't know, the Zero Day Initiative or something like that, for whatever reason. But nonetheless, there are some really, really talented people, it turns out, around that team, and I'm glad that I did come to know about them. And I'm glad that I ended up, just accidentally with one of their badges. What the badge is it's a series of like CTF challenges that are designed by that team, that are like around hardware or embedded systems, capture the flag type stuff. So what it is there's a board with like a victim STM32F4, which I know you're a huge fan of,
Yeah.
as well as a Xilinx XC2C32 Alpha CPLD. And then it also has a section of the board that's partitioned off and you can completely isolate as well, which has a secondary STM32 that you can load with the Blackmagic probe firmware to use to debug the victim side. So it's all on like a one encompass board, hardware based CTF. And I was just like, this is blowing my mind. I wish that I would have known about these sooner. And I expect, or I imagine that there will be more of those from other people, like probably coming out soon. Have you played
You
around with
think
the
it's
Black?
really interesting that they Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, have
Sorry.
you played around with the Black Magic Probe before? It was a board that One Bit Squared did that does JTAG and SWD, like, and JTagulator style will has the GDB server that's set up and all that jazz.
I haven't. Most of my JPEG stuff has come from like a $20 USB blaster or something that I bought with an old dev kit back in the day. Uh,
Yeah, I
but
don't.
looking at it, it looks like it's something that I'd love to get a hold of and attach to everything with JTAG that I can possibly think of.
Yeah, I'd heard mention of it elsewhere, but like you, I have some other kit that I typically use to do that. I'm always interested in trying something new though, because for home gamer type stuff, you're not going to get one of those multi-thousand-dollar, super fast clock, JTAG devices that's put out there. I think we had talked about those a little bit in the last episode.
Yeah. And like I don't remember like every possible thing that they have out there, but even JTagulators, I feel like are what are they like $400 a piece or something like that.
Right.
Um, it's just like yeah, I think that they're great and they're obviously a wonderful tool, but it's like man, I don't really want to just for some home gaming stuff, um, drop that kind of cash on that. So I'd be
Yeah.
really interested to see where it's possible to go with the Black Magic Probe.
Yeah, I haven't played around with them much, but I will be doing that. I'm going to try to go through those challenges, and if I get around the time to do that, the cycles to do that, I'll throw some of those out on our site too, which is repp.show for anybody who might be hearing this when we actually finally get to publishing these out on all the different streaming platforms.
Close,
Hey, we're starting out. I think we have a
close.
little bit of breathing room here, right? So yeah,
Yeah,
those
for
that
two randos just talking about stuff that they like.
old men screaming into the cloud. But yeah, that Paranoids badge was made by a guy who I followed for a while on Twitter and didn't even realize it. A guy named Robert uh Ooh or we oh it's OU. So apologies if you happen to listen to this one day, Rob. And I had seen that he had sent out some tweets saying that he was no longer going to be on that team, that red team. So sad to see that. But if he is the guy who did make and design the badge, or maintains it. I'm sure he'll be off to other cool nerdy experiences that we'll soon see. But yeah, looking forward to cracking around with that. Badge life, man, badge life is insane these days.
Feels like everybody's got a badge now.
It really, really is the case that everybody has a badge now. There was another group in the aerospace village who had a badge that was all the rage. It was a multi-tiered board that had like a land portion in the front and then like sky and then a space section that were all progressively bigger. And each one had those little SAO ports, which man, I love some of those. SAO, for those who are uninitiated to, is shitty add-on. And it's just this little crappy 6 pen designation that really just kind of lights something up usually. But man, some of the cheeky fun that comes out of that those SAOs is hilarious. This year's Aerospace Village Badge 2, I can't remember how much it ended up going for, but towards the end they had some that they were just putting out there for maybe like $20, something really low. But all of the different SAOs that you could actually put on that badge were wild. Like they had the space shuttle, so basically like an SAO for every one of those scenes, from normal airplanes, to down to ground things. So I think that the SAO thing though is great, has been great. There have been a lot of funny, cheeky ones, but also some people, of course, in true hacker fashion, going out of their way to make super elaborate ones, which are inconvenient to plug up just to the port. It's almost like a standalone thing itself. It's like, why did you even make this into an SAO? But that's always funny to see. Also, still, since we're on the like news of the good, there's the book this year, the print off book. In years past, I think it was that 23 that we went to. There was the one that had some of the challenge. Part of the challenge for the main badge challenge was in that too. Do you recall that?
I do.
Kind of printed all around in the
I don't
margins.
remember like what the yeah. So I remember that part a little bit, but I was like, I was trying to think in my head. I was like, man, which I don't really remember what the symbols were. I just remember being like, oh, that's kind of neat. Um, and then I think I was headed off to look at something else. I don't remember what.
Yeah, definitely did not get into that set. I don't think we made it to that challenge section. I think it was Crypto Potato who had kind of like turned us onto that too. What are these weird symbols and what do they
I'm
mean?
pretty sure.
But this year's book had some gravity to her. It was a thick boy, and I kind of appreciated it. I don't always, I don't know, keep those or display those or whatever, but it's just the same kind of thing as like with video games, how they used to come with those books that had all of the artwork in them and maybe some stickers or some things and told you how to play the game. And nowadays, you're lucky to even get like an insert if you buy a console game.
Right, like something with like a CD key or on it or something cheap. Like I was like, oh, great, thanks.
Yeah, you
Like this
buy
is the key
like
you need to play multiplayer.
yeah, or you got the anniversary edition. Here's a QR code to download a cool sword or something like
Uh,
that. But yeah,
I
that
hate
was.
how true that is.
But I don't know. We've talked about it in the past. I think one of my earliest and favorite first games that I could probably still remember. I don't have it anymore. The book art and stuff like that. But I loved was Final Fantasy 3, aka 6, on the Super Nintendo. Do you remember that one?
Oh yeah, I definitely remember that. I never had the artwork for it though, right? Because I was like wound up buying it used secondhand or renting it from the store or something.
Yeah, some of the later on when they made it, they made that remake. I want to say it was called Anthology, maybe for the PlayStation 1. They
Hmm.
had some stuff in that too, but it was around that time. When do you think it was that like box art started to kind of go the way of the dinosaur?
Oh man, I want to say it was a PS3 era. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
PS3 and Xbox 360, where like there was still some box art, but then like the stuff that came with it, you know what I mean, would be like like it'd just be the box and it wouldn't have like any of the artwork or anything like that in there, and like everything kind of started to just become online. And I think probably a little bit of it is like because consoles had gotten so powerful. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like a Super Nintendo would usually run your game and typically just barely, so there wasn't a whole lot of room to be putting like help and stuff like that in there. But once
Hmm.
everything in the game could walk you through so much stuff so intricately in a interactive fashion, they just sort of started getting rid of books, and then they wouldn't have the artwork and stuff like that in them anymore. So that's kind of the era. I think like late PS2, early PS3 era for me was what I saw that start to go away for consoles. Some PC games will still do that, but you got to usually pay like an extra $100 for whatever other shit you don't want with it.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. That's probably was the case, right? Like all of the spare memory that you could use was used, and then so you kind of put that help stuff out. And then too, around that time,
Well, too.
I was gonna say that with it being online as well, then being online really started to become a thing around then too. And there was the different sites that people would stand up to be kind of like your walkthroughs and your help, versus going and getting the book next to the Game Pros and the magazine section of the department store.
Well, and I think not just necessarily that. It's like even if it was going to be, published with the game and handed out with the game, it's like you're a dude that runs a video game company or a publishing studio or whatever, and you're like, yeah. So we put all this stuff in there, and we need it in there for the player to whatever. So we're gonna have to pay however many dollars extra a cartridge to double or triple the size of our memory that we're probably not going to use all of, or we can pay like 87 cents, per million of these books.
Yeah,
Like, so it seems like a pretty good business choice to me to just print the books. And I know it becomes like a nostalgia thing for a lot of folks, but I think that's in the end probably why they just printed the books instead, because paper was so much cheaper than ROM back then.
too true. I think, well, also, if you want to look at it from a business opportunity perspective, not only were you saving yourself the cost of, printing those or whatever at the time, once they started to do away with them and save themselves however much money that ended up being, but you could sell that separately in a special edition one or as an additional thing you could buy, separately. And then that's when they microtransaction stuff started coming online and stuff like that too.
Oh yeah.
So that could be a whole other episode. It would actually probably just be a 30-minute rant of me screaming into the microphone talking about how much I hate microtransactions.
I am right there with you. Microtransactions and like, just like sub sales or however you want to think about it. Like everything, you know what I mean? Like you can't even book a flight anymore without checking in and like, oh, do you want to sit where you want? That's going to be an extra $30. Like, fuck, man. Like, do I
Microtransactions on
need to pay
life.
extra for every chair?
By
Right? It's like, would you like to live an extra 30 minutes?
by the way, in addition to paying $30 extra for this chair, in order to do that, you have to sign up for our loyalty program. And in order to do that, you have to sign up with all sorts of information that we're going to harvest and sell to third parties so that until the end of time, you've made friends with our business affiliates.
Oh man, and I think the thing that gets me about it too, especially with plane seats, now that I'm on the rant, I guess, um, is like they'll do that for exit row seats, right? It's like, hey, give us an extra $30 and you can have legroom and responsibility. We appreciate your money for doing our job. Like, what in the world is going on? Like, how are
Oh
you gonna make
man.
me pay to take on extra responsibility?
Man, so that reminds me too. So on our way back, actually, me and Damon were flying out on a flight together, and we thought that we got there kind of early enough, but we did not anticipate the kind of like amount of people that were going to be there. Thankfully, well, really for me, he ended up finding around the corner there was another shorter line to be able to like wait through, and we made our flight just fine. But while we were there, I can't remember the name of the organization or group that runs it, but there's like a whole other group where you can go up to this kiosk and buy like fast pass through TSA. And I'm like,
Yeah,
doesn't this defeat the whole purpose?
like what?
Yeah, it's another
I
group.
have seen that at foreign airports, actually.
So I hadn't seen it domestically. I don't even recall seeing it at foreign airports, but domestically, you basically are paying for your way to like it's kind of the same really as TSA pre-check, I think, so far as I know, in terms of what you have to go through in order to like be a vetted person. But then it's just like a way
Hmm.
to like shake you down for extra dollars, and I'm just like, no, of course we've gotten to the point where let's get through this line by paying money for it, like in a fast lane.
So I remember foreign airports having a thing where basically like you would go up there like with your bag and stuff like that. And they would like check your ID and they would like rummage through your bag and stuff and then they put their tag on it and then like wrap it in cellophane or something like that. and it would kind of get you like a quick pass through some of the security where you just be like, oh yeah, the dudes back here checked me for 15 euro or whatever it happened to be, and they'd not just wave you through, but they wouldn't put nearly as much effort as into like questioning you and stuff, like if those folks had like checked your stuff ahead of time. And in my head I was like, man, it like if I were a drug cartel, I would offer this service so that like randos with drugs could come up and I would just pass them through, right? Like that thing Google did with 411 Goog, where they're like, yeah, we'll offer you directions, but really we're training our Google Voice AI or whatever it was.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I would totally offer that service because like you just pay me, and then also sometimes I use this to smuggle drugs. Like it seems like the perfect plan.
Oh, you've heard it here
So
first, ladies and
I don't
gentlemen.
know
When
why they
that
had
when
that.
that news inevitably breaks that there's been some malfeasance with those companies, it was a prediction by
Man,
one Dell that that was going to happen. But you're right. That kind of
just one
mentality and
random.
thinking was is totally. I could see that happening. It's the same with like I don't know if you recall reading, or I don't know if you have. There was a book that I read called Spam Nation by Brian Krebs, which is a great read, by the way. But in it, he was talking about how spam came about in the early 2000s and how a lot of those cyber criminals then later would be able they could pivot them over to being like this co-opt from I guess Russia to be able to do non-attribution related cyber attacks and stuff like that modernly. But at the time he was talking about how that business opportunity took on, and of course like post-Soviet like world there would be insurance companies that popped up, and basically they would go around to like your house and be like, man, do you need some insurance? And people would be like, no, I think I'm good. And they're like, I'd be ashamed if a fire started tomorrow in your house and you didn't have insurance. So I feel like that same kind of shakedown scheme is happening just in more of a corporate setting here, and you're kind of stuck. What do you do about it? I don't know.
Like computer security software is kind of like, I don't know, just in general had that vibe about it for a long time. I don't want to say since the McAfee days
Yeah.
for obvious reasons, but you know what I mean? I'm like, oh man, it'd sure be a shame if you got a virus. You never know the next time Sony's going to release a rootkit with a CD.
Oh yeah.
It makes
And
me wonder what stuff that they had, like that folks had going on behind the scenes like that, where they were playing both sides.
oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, the same person making the malware detection, making a malware that, isn't detectable. And then all of a sudden we're first in line to be able to come up with the defense against it. It's crazy how fast that was. And that's because we're the best. We're the best in this business and you should buy our product. I could see that happening too.
I always worry about that every time I see like what is it, Kaspersky or Kaspersky or however you
Yeah.
pronounce it, right there with the Russian firewall. I'm just like, man, this feels like such a bad idea.
Yeah. And two, in addition to just that kind of stuff, there's the whole, if you have multiple AV engines installed, tagging the other engines as malicious.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for Virus Total.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And like I try to run everything through Virus Total, which hasn't always been my saving grace, I guess.
Shout out to
There's just
Virus Total.
like so much out there. Yeah, thanks guys. But I really do like their website, and I think it's great the way it works. But like, yeah, even then, it's like, man, like, couldn't these things just get along? You know what I mean? Like, is there any need for businesses to kind of be this crappy about that? It gets me frustrated.
Yeah. Thankfully, we are beneficiaries of that whole scheme. So keep us
At least for
employed for.
now.
um, anyway, we've gotten off the beaten path a little bit, which I'm cool with. But I did want to be able to get in a couple other things before my stomach starts to take control here. I'm sure it's yours as well.
I'm in the
Um,
same boat for sure.
so I'd mentioned Lost earlier, and I did get an opportunity this time to sit down and talk to him in an extended setting. I wish though what I would have asked him two things. I wish first I would have asked him how he came up with that, like what his thought process was behind what you had mentioned earlier with those really weird symbols and like how he possibly came across that for the whole translate thing, because that's just fascinating to how did you come across that. And then the other thing was, after like doing all of these things all these years, like what kind of still surprises you, or what do you think is interesting from the challenges that you haven't been a part of. um Shit, maybe at some point we might be able to get him on the show, question mark. Maybe that would be cool.
Would you like to try our podcast?
He had anyway though, so at the closing ceremonies, Dark Tangent actually had two of these big unwieldy aluminum like trophies that he had made, and he was like, "Oh, good luck with these, getting these through the airport. They were like, 12 pounds a piece or something like that. It's like easily throw your over your checked luggage." So I got a laugh out of that. But it was the very first time they'd done it. It was an Uber contributor trophy, and so he was thanking them for all of the many contributions, because the badge challenge, what it is today, really starts out with Lost wanting to take it a step further than what it used to be way back in the day. And I wasn't really kind of online in the whole infosec scene back then, so I can't comment about what those days were like. But I can definitely say that in the midst of him running them, we got some exposure to that, and it has kicked open a whole series of other villages and challenges and stuff like that that are just awesome. It's awesome that they exist. There's so many things that you can get involved with. So shout out to Lost. Um, Another thing that I thought was pretty cool too, which I think I might have shared you some pictures for. There was a vending machine out there in, I want to say it was right next to the chill out room. Maybe it was the competitions room, where there was a bunch of things set up, like for the normal buttons where you'd hit for like whatever soda. It would be like, hey, do you want a root shell? Or like, hey, do you want to, this or that? It was dispensing these different like little kits, like Raspberry Pi type kits and stuff like that. And there was also a series of receipts that it printed off as well. And I just thought that was the funniest thing that I had seen at the con in a long time. I don't know if it had existed previous to that. Were you kind of aware of the existence of those things at all?
I absolutely had no idea, actually. And I'm looking at one of the pictures that you sent, and it's like Diet Open WRT. I'm just like, that's perfect. Dr. Callie or Dr. Kale. Sorry, no, it's Callie.
Yeah.
I was like, man, um, this is creative. Like, why can't I ever think of stuff like this when something fun's about to go down? Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
I don't know who started that. I didn't get to spend the time trying to run down who it was, but I'll probably do some investigative research here after this is wrapped up, and try to see and holler at them and say, "Hey, thanks for that experience. That was actually really cool." So yeah, that's the kind of the last of the things I think that wrap up stuff for the good category for DEF CON 30. The bad, rolling into that, my God, there were so many people in Vegas, and there were so many people at the con. I want to say there was over 25,000, and that bested the last one, I think, prior to 2020 by at least like 3K or so people. Last year it was nice because it was still, it had all of the modern stuff that they didn't have 10 years ago in terms of villages and competitions, but there's only like 9,000 people who showed up. So, like you double, triple, quadruple that number, and it starts to just get impossible to get into a line for anything. Everything fills up, within hours of it being released on the site. The merch line started at like 0830 on the first day, and they had to stop it when it was up at like I want to say like 6 or 8 hour wait time. I was like, that is insane. Um, even back like 10, 15 years ago, there was the long line to be able to get badges, which I think with the pre-reg, they've done a little bit better about the badge at least. But man, everything else, they need to spend some time as well trying to get some sort of head count. And I don't know exactly how you do that. Maybe you have some ideas on that front. But outside of a guy at the door with a clicker saying, welcome to Costco, I love you, I have no idea what they would do to count people that hackers would be happy about.
I don't think there's a good way that you're going to get an accurate head count. I mean, I guess you could count the number of tickets you sell. You know what I
True.
mean? But that's the only way I really see that going down. I just don't see. First of all, if you set up an electronic system for doing that thing, at a hacker convention, it is just asking for trouble.
Same thoughts.
You know, um, I'm not going to install anything on my phone. I'm sure as hell not going to scan a fucking QR code at a hacking convention. Like that's just not going to happen. Like
Yeah.
there's no solution around that thing that I think is going to be um, going to work for that. I think they're just going to have to guess or count or something. You know, like
Yeah. Well, the main
that's
thing that
it.
I was getting at there was that there were certain villages like the aerospace village which had a ton of guests, but they had a really small space, so it was always cramped and claustrophobic in there. But conversely, at some of the other villages, it was wide open and there was maybe, 5 people in the room at any given time. So there needs to be like a redistribution of room size based on the average attendee size that goes to said rooms. Same with like the red team village. That had a pretty small room and almost everybody was going there. The line where the building that they were into was cramped. The hallways were cramped. You had the sock goons yelling at people against the wall, which is always annoying. And I think that they can really just frankly do better in understanding the number size stuff like that, getting those solid like metrics out there and figuring it out. Figure it out.
Figured it.
So that was that. Also, like I said too, the badge kind of maybe in the bad. It's in the good category for sure for what it is, but for some of those kind of minor things, I would kind of say like the lanyard being shorting out and ruining people's badges like straight away. That wasn't very cool. And I think that there could have been a little bit more TLC given to ops testing stuff like that, especially for as big as this event is, and making sure
Yeah.
that people, you know, wouldn't be too crazy with them.
Yeah, I think that really does make sense. And I know it's tough to get any of that stuff down, but that's always a situation where it's like, hey, what in the world is going on with that? Like,
Hmm.
it feels like a thing that I would have tested ahead of time, but I probably wouldn't have, and then would have been just surprised, honestly.
Yeah, it's easy to talk crap here into a microphone, but man, I still have a tremendous amount of respect for them for taking all that time to be able to do the challenge because you not only have to think about the literal design characteristics and stuff like that coming up, but you have to think about weird ways that people would connect them uncommonly, and then also making just an interesting or challenging challenge. How do you make that interesting enough to be cool, but not too hard to where nobody's going to do it or be able to do it
Yeah,
rather? I think that for the badge thing and for the LineCon thing, I think that there's incremental improvements that you can make with both, but I really don't necessarily know how you're going to completely avoid them at all. I think that for the con itself, maybe at some point they would start capping off the number of people. I don't know how many people it's going to take to get before they would have to do that. But you got to have some diminishing returns. If it gets north of 30K people and they're just going to run the whole strip. Damon had speculated that maybe there might be another con that springs off of it, which I thought that was interesting, an interesting observation. Maybe
no,
that.
no, like on that note, like I was kind of thinking, especially because I have been sort of reading how bad line cons got and how like they just have so many people and all this stuff going on at the same time. I was like, man, maybe they would be best off like splitting the whole thing up. You know what I mean? Like I don't mean like the whole thing, but maybe like a couple of hotels or areas that are near each other there on the strip, and it's like, yeah, so the stuff relating to that, like this is the hardware area, this is the software area, this is the like et cetera area. You know what I mean? Like the auxiliary stuff, or the extra things and stuff like that, and just kind of rent out more space, and then like have a centralized thing where it's like, yeah, this badge gets you into this one, and this one. Or also, if you don't care about this stuff over here, you can maybe just buy a badge to this one over here,
That's
um,
interesting.
and then
Yeah,
spend your whole day at the hardware thing.
right. So I mean, that's basically how they do it now, with splitting it up between the buildings and stuff like that. But the problem or issue, even when they're relatively close this year, I was hoping when they had announced that Caesar's Forum was going to be the main place, that was going to be like maybe the only place. But I'm sure after they went to figure out the logistics of it, they found out that, and rightly so, that was too small. There's no one place that could really necessarily hold them all. But then the issue you have when you start to drag on all of the others too is that, like, man, the line or the walk that it took, to get from Caesar's Forum like all the way back over to Link or something like that. Like you were putting in some miles. I think some people had shared out on Twitter what they had gotten. The longest one that I had seen so far was like 13 miles over 3 days. which is
That's not too bad. It's half
yeah,
a marathon.
yeah. But I think that's an interesting idea. The hey, maybe get like badges that will only get you into certain subsets of things, especially too if it could subsidize the cost and kind of like declutter all of the areas where you're not really interested in going.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting
And I
idea.
think that's kind of what some of it was for me, or I don't know, like it wasn't something I looked at like negatively or something like that. But there's just a lot of stuff that I don't want to say I thought was crappy. It was just stuff that didn't necessarily interest me, right? Like
Yeah.
stuff where I was like, yeah, I get why people like that, but it's just not my thing. And it'd
Hmm.
be kind of cool if some of that stuff was broken up into different areas. That would kind of exacerbate the walk, though. So I don't know, maybe start renting out. What are those things that mall cops use?
You're talking about like either like the little hoverboard scooters or there's an actual name for them. A Paul Blart
Oh,
Mall
there's
Cop.
those. I was thinking, yes, exactly that thing. I uh,
That's what I'm going to change the episode name to.
now
The
uh,
Paul Blart Mall Cop things.
yeah, right. Start renting out Segway.
Segways. Holy cow. Couldn't think of it. There were some people who had them. There was a
Uh,
couple of goons that had those, not Segways, but the just the smaller hoverboard ones.
and I think that'd be awesome. I felt like I saw those that year that we were there, that we'd gone together. I felt like I saw everybody riding those hoverboards around. Uh, I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, seems like a good time.
Well, diminishing returns too, based on how many people are on them. There's probably the right amount of people on them now, because you had 25,000 people on them. That would be well. Number one, that just like you said with electronic things, somebody is 100% going to try to figure out a way to make a bunch of people crash those things if possible,
Yes.
which would be fun. I think that would be funny. It wouldn't be a great liability thing maybe for them, but
Right?
anyway,
Like I could just see the announcement and like we don't know why some of you guys have these with Wi-Fi, but for those of you that do, be careful.
yeah,
Somebody's figured out how to whatever, and now like your thing that had whatever arbitrary thing on it, Wi-Fi or what have you, has now been completely hacked, and they're gonna stop working.
yep. Um, so yeah, it remains. Maybe they just need to come up with their own awesome facility that's, like a tower, has both. They come up with their own gamble, casino, tower, hacker convention rooms. The dream, right?
Right? Just DEF CON Tower, like a Avengers style, instead of Stark Tower, we have DEF CON Tower.
There was some grumbling
Casino
too
most of
on the bad side of that, and another reason why Damon brought up where he thinks that it might break off is that so the days following, how after closing ceremonies, that's basically it. They do trainings now, like paid trainings on like Monday, Tuesday of the following week.
hmm
So there's some people who are upset about that because and they're like, oh well, that belongs at Black Hat or whatever. But the cost differential was pretty big for the trainings there versus the ones that are at Black Hat, which is, let's be honest, just like a corporate town, a way for the corporations to show off their wares. There is some good training that happens there, but it's not DEF CON. The whole vibe, the who shows up and why they show up is way different. And then of course there's
Yeah,
B-sides
and I
too. So I mean, if you did break off, when would you do it?
Oh, I was just like, yeah, like I don't know why anybody would be upset about that if they advertise that stuff ahead of time. It's like, great, I get some training from some great professional people who've got all this knowledge and experience and everything, and I don't have to pay for another plane ticket. You know what I mean? Like, it cost me what 2 days worth of hotel room, a plane ticket I was already going to buy, so that doesn't probably matter. And in fact, it might even be cheaper if um, airlines charge, like to charge extra during times when they're busy. So it's like, yeah, um, what's the downside? You know what I mean? Like I can't imagine possibly complaining about that.
I think it was most of the old hats who were complaining about that, who'd been there for years and said, "Oh, the whole vibe is changing." But I mean, even with pre-registration, people are grumbling about that. But I don't know. It's kind of one of those adopt the times type things. Because back when it was at Alexis Park or whatever, and there was 1,000 people or something showing up, maybe that was all right. But 25K showing up, like man, you can't get around some of the stuff that I think you have to do, which maybe some of the hackers aren't going to be super happy with, but also shit, maybe that's a deterrent that's going to keep some people at home and keep the numbers down.
It's not just that, man. It's just that like DEF CON isn't this little backwater get together anymore. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
people are coming from around the world in increasing numbers. You are not going to push 25,000 people through that line that we stood in. You remember when we like that year we went to DEF CON and it was like, what did we spend, like 2 hours just walking through that line basically?
Yeah.
It's like that's not feasible for 25,000 people. You know,
Right.
let's I don't know, stop pretending like DEF CON's something that's not now.
Yeah. One good thing that I saw with that, obviously with the track one being like with the 3D camera or whatever too, I thought that there were some people, the Discord was huge again this year, and I think that they had also streamed some things on Twitch. And so my take as well is, for years that for whatever reason I just really don't feel like going out and sweating it out in the desert. If I could catch some of that, from you can't catch the villages obviously in contests fully at home. Some you can, like I believe the IoT village might have been remote. You're not going to catch them all, but for the ones that you like that happen to opt into a Twitch or happen to opt into, some other platform, CTFD, if that's what they're running on, to be able to allow you to still do all of those competitions. And you're probably likely going to be on a Discord with a friend of yours who is visiting there in person, and you can do the challenges across the world. Another adapt with the times type of situation. I don't see why you wouldn't do that.
Absolutely.
And so too, I think some of the villages and stuff are going to be getting more speaker time. It was something that you've got your main talks right in your normal tracks, but increasingly as well you have both the demo labs, which is cool, as well as the speaker tracks within the villages, which is happening. So it's almost maybe naturally splitting off to be what you were talking about, almost like, hey, if I want to go and I'm a blue teamer and I would spend 100% of my time in the blue team village, you can, because not only can you get demos there, but you can also get the talks, and then you can also experience the kind of not timed bin types of challenges and sticker swaps and all of that, rubbing elbows with other people who you find to be really interesting in that space. And not really spend any of your time going off to, hardware hacking village or hack the sea or anything like that and have a really good time.
I definitely feel that way because one of the things that like kind of happened to me at DEF CON is I felt like in really any village or any con that's got like the villages and stuff, it's like I could spend my entire time in those villages
Yeah.
and just completely forget about the talks. Not that the talks aren't great and everything. I enjoy everyone I go to, but it's like, man, like this is my kind of thing, right? Like
Yeah.
this is amazing. I could just do this. Like I'd give you $250 just to do this.
Since you had gone to, man, the RF village and wireless village stuff has just become something insane. I don't think I shared any pictures out with you this time from that, but they have grown substantially, and the kind of game that people are bringing to be able to show off their stuff and do the competitions and stuff like that is has increased as well, which I think also makes sense because SDR and everything has come a long way since those times too. The bar to entry for a lot of that, both in terms of money as well as accessibility towards not just some math book of EE stuff that lets you actually poke around with real waveforms, is becoming pretty accessible to most, and that's cool to see.
Yeah, and only getting better in my opinion. So hopefully those get even better over time. You know.
Oh, one thing I did not mention during the good, which I wanted to mention now. Shout out to the guys at Idaho National Laboratories who put on the Cyber Escape Room. I had an opportunity to kind of get in with a special crew early one morning before the normal start of things because, of course, I didn't spend any time ahead of time trying to sign up. But thankfully, by virtue of kind of a who you know type situation, I was able to get some time in there, and they had an incredible experience set up where you had to do a lot of interdisciplinary things from ICS to wireless cracking to physical investigation to computer forensics and piece together all of these things, which will literally give you access to different keys. And the whole point was like you were diffusing like a bomb. And so I'll make sure to throw those pictures, maybe some of those pictures up in the show notes, if they don't betray any of the kind of challenge secrets or anything like that. I think some of them would. But huge shout out to those guys. They were awesome and they had an incredible experience. You were supposed to be doing that all in about an hour's time. And I think the crew who I was there with was able to do it with about 18 minutes to spare. So we had a little bit of help along the way too, because towards the end of the time they were getting to officially open it up. But that was that was an awesome experience. And man, how cool would it be at like tour camp or something like that to have one of those experiences in the wilderness too, to where you could like combination airsoft slash cyber challenge slash like navigate, like you could have your whole little James Bond experience there. I think that would be incredible.
Sounds awesome.
Sign me up. Maybe we could put one on. Come out of your cornfields and check out this thing that we have going on.
Oh man, I'd be curious to see how that went.
Me too. Um, Probably as terribly as we wouldn't think of something or some liability thing, right? And someone would get shot and with an airsoft to the eye or something like that. I don't know. Somebody more qualified than us. The idea's out there. You can have it for free. Do that thing. I'll be the first one to sign up.
Good luck, everyone.
The final thing on the good, the bad, and the ugly for the con is the ugly. And man, the very first day, like as you know, on that first day when there's tickets and stuff, there's not necessarily a whole lot going on. But for the kickoff for the first day, there's some villages and things like that opening at 10, but they just did not have projectors. And double tap on the line con for them. There were some people who, despite the fact that they were starting at 10, had been in line since like 6 a.m. So 4 hours waiting in a line just to have a chance to get into the village. And then once they were in there, no projectors were set up. I guess the scuttle there is just some miscommunication behind the quartermaster team and others, but a lot of people adapted and got there quickly enough. But again, going back to as big of a production as it is, like having some more well-oiled pieces to it would have been nice, especially for the villages. Which the villages in the competition, I almost feel like it's the draw. Like a lot of people, I mean, you could always catch the talks later when they put them up on the media server, download those and see the ones that you want, as well as some of those speakers too are speaking at multiple con events. So even if you don't catch them at one for DEF CON, there may be a smaller local one based out of wherever they're close to, where they also give it, or they kind of give their starter talk to it, trying to prepare for DEF CON. So all about those villages and competitions and things like that. If that's kind of one of your main draws, you want to make sure that those areas have the greatest TLC possible to make them a fun con for everybody. Okay, so but anyway, that's kind of the wrap up for the good, the bad, and the ugly, at least from my perspective and how I saw it. I would have liked to have gotten a little bit of a time on this year on the IoT villages CTF, but just other obligations popped up. I did talk to a couple of other people and then reviewed some of the presentation stuff a little bit later. There were a few talks I'd like to shout out about because I learned something new. I shared some of that information out with you as well. The first one of those was the trailer shouting, or talking to PLC for trucks remotely with software-defined radio. Yeah, let me fill you in a little bit. It's kind of really interesting, and I know that you know some people, I think, who are involved at some point with trucking, so maybe something to rebroadcast to those communities of people. But in that particular talk, there was two guys, Ben Gardner and Chris Poor, talking about a standard I had no idea about called SSC P485. So what is that?
Mm-hmm.
It was introduced about around 2000 or so as a complement to something called J2497. What it is like a spread spectrum chirp signal that's sent with, like, it has a preamble of ASK and the body is PSK. And there's only like one chip manufacturer who makes the SSC P485, I think in Telon. I saw some kicking around on eBay, like a whole batch of them for like 750. Couldn't find them too much, a lot of other places, but I thought, wow, this is fascinating. I know absolutely nothing about this. And the provenance or history behind it was that around 91, there was a committee that formed to be able to talk about how there needed to be some ABS fault dash indicators. And then, of course, IEEE style, when will those fire off and why will they fire off? And then some people, put in their bids for requests and stuff like that, wanted a second cable. But then the communities of people who are involved with it were like, we don't want this to be any more complicated than it needs to be. And they were worried that it was going to get into proprietary licensing and stuff like that. And surely it would have, had they not, put up such a ruckus about it. But anyway, out of all of that, PLC for trucks was formed. And then those researchers were found out that they could inject a signal from certain distances away based on how many watts they were transmitting. Like so, like 12.5 watts or something like that from a foot and a half, and then a lot more if they were around 20 feet away or so, which is still, you're driving right next to somebody with an SDR in the car and you're maybe what, 6 feet away. So
Yeah, if that.
yeah, if that. So, and because it lacks a differential mode on the cable, like something that would allow you to shunt some noise that would be induced onto the cable away to ground, you can
Mhm.
transmit to them, and that's that noise. Not really necessarily noise in your case, but noise in air quotes is just straight up taken by the line. And so what you can do with that is something called a chuff test, which I hadn't heard of either, which allows you to send like actual like air to the service brake lines. So the sum up there is that remotely you would be able to send commands over SDR next to one of the tractor trailers employing this, and they virtually all are, to allow you to hit the brakes. Terrifying.
Man, yeah, that's dangerous on so many fronts. Well, one, like, if you were in a situation where you wanted to say, like hijack a truck or something like that, like hijack cargo, like that'd be great. Because normally, obviously, the brake system isn't like extra complicated or anything like that, but it's got ABS and all that stuff. You got the two glad hands that provide air to the trailers, and like, if there is no air, everything's brakes lock up, which is like a fail-safe mechanism. But yeah, if you could just like randomly turn those brakes on, um, but also like also, I've said also so many times now. Good lord. Um, if you like just wanted to cause havoc or like kill somebody, like that's also really dangerous. Like if you just locked somebody's brakes up or applied them more often than you should have going down a hill or something, and you can get them hot to the point that they're no longer effective. It's got like a however many 1,000-pound battering ram barreling through some town at the bottom of a hill or something. And it's just this
Yeah,
massively dangerous. Like it's already to the point where we have stuff on the side of the road for it. But
exactly.
it's crazy to me that it's so protected, and not surprising at all, man. How often
Right.
does anybody in any form of automotive industry know anything about security?
Well, there's that, and then like most things that were created in the '80s, conceived of in the '80s and implemented in the '90s, all you have to do is go back to Smashed in the Stack for Fun and Profit to around that era was when this stuff was starting to come out. So I mean, it just like most industrial things, like you said, automotive things doesn't get this TLC that it needs, for the security front or security side of things. I thought it was fascinating both because it was a glimpse for me into a world which I had never seen into before, not even knowing that this thing existed. And then in addition to not knowing it existed, when I do find out about it, find out that it's, massively vulnerable. And I think the air brake thing was just one thing that they could possibly do. They had also mentioned that they hadn't done really any investigative work to figure out whether or not it would be possible over the air to reprogram some of those controllers or do your other kind of like hacky type stuff, and for whatever many multitude of reasons you could think of, you'd want to do that. you know um, so obviously you can read information off of them as well, maybe a little bit less fascinating, but maybe not, depending if you're looking for something in particular. Like you could use that as a method or means in order to track something. Not that you don't have a million other ways to do that, but I don't know. You start to get to throw in some of those interesting, approaches out to some people, and I'm sure they could come up with some diabolical stuff.
Well, I think that also another terrifying thing about that is like the trucks are already being tracked regularly, right? Like
Yeah.
depending on the company through cell phones or through whatever, right? Like that data is there. If those two systems talk to each other, there is an unfortunate amount of data, right? To the point where like you can
Mm.
tell if this dude's like legal. You know what I mean? Like has he been on the road too long? When was his last break? Has he been on duty? Blah 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 blah. Like it's amazing the amount of information you can get from that.
I was thinking you were going to talk about swimming upstream. So maybe it is that you locally kind of get onto the truck somehow or the controller. And if by some other methods that's tied in to anything related to talking to dispatch or doing something over the cell phone, finding a way that once you're kind of trusted on the system swimming elsewhere, I'm just kind of throwing spaghetti to the wall here, but because I don't know how they work and what connects to what, but I, haven't seen a number of other things that are connected to other things they shouldn't be. Like, let's say a point of sale system hooked up to the HVAC controller. um, that you wouldn't want to have, because in that case, people were able to go for the path of least resistance, get into the controllers for the HVAC, and then be able to get over to the point of sale systems and be able to cause a bunch of financial ruckus.
And that's definitely so stuff along those lines is a possibility. So people like to think about big trucks kind of like the way they think about tanks, right? Not as this giant sophisticated thing that's got all of these components and all of that stuff, but big trucks are that way now. Semi trucks are rolling computers like everything else. Very few of them shift manually anymore, right? A
Mm-hmm.
lot of them are coming with automatic transmission, fuel economy, especially in this day and age. The engines are electronically governed. Um, there are other brakes that can also be run from different things, right? The Jacobson engine brakes and things like that. So there's a lot of systems on the trucks that people don't think about, and having that kind of thing vulnerable. Even if you're like a state actor, right? And thinking to yourself, like, man, what's the best way to, interdict in this country or something like that? Supply chain interdiction is serious, as we found out recently,
Yeah.
like, um, in general, supply chains are not a strong point of manufacturing.
Right.
We've kind of seen that with the chip shortages and stuff.
100%.
There's a lot of possibilities there.
There really are. So
What happened to this truck?
can you imagine,
Sorry.
in terms of a, would you even be able to tell? I mean, is there a DFIR for trucks? They get onto the scene with the police and the highway safety people and all that? Probably not.
So there, oh man, there's other stuff that like we haven't talked about with trucks that do happen with some of that stuff. Yeah, like there's if you've ever driven past a way station, if you've ever even paid attention to a way station, before most common way stations these days, you'll see a thing hanging up above the road, and there'll be like rectangular cutouts in the road. Those are rolling way stations. So like if you've got a transponder in your truck, it talks to the thing up like almost like a stoplight, and then it can take the instantaneous readings of the truck on that, and then just weigh you on the road and tell you to pull in if something's wrong. So
Right.
there's a lot of other stuff that could very possibly be connected with that could make things go wrong.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And I think lots more work to check out involved with that. Moving on from the trailer shouting, though, another one that I thought that was a little bit off of the beaten path, and those ones really just always sing to me because, I'm not necessarily interested in hearing about yet another person's endpoint solution that allows them to be, heuristic or antivirus or behavior. It's like, okay, everybody's in that space. I get it. But anyway, it was this guy, Win Schwartau, I think. He had this really massively fascinating one called I Began Hacking in 1958 and Then Survived Rock and Roll. How Stevie Wonder, Bob Marley, Jimi Hendrix, and Liza Minnelli prepared me for incident response and security. What a name. So obviously there's some interest, I guess, probably based off the name alone. But early in his presentation, he kind of talks about his upcoming, and along with what we were talking about in our initial episode, where, yeah, there's a kid. That kid is interested in nerdy, hacky things. That kid pushes the big red buttons and finds out about those nerdy, hacky things, has the knack, to use a Dilbert term, and eventually finds himself in some sort of STEM career field. So both of his parents were really strongly involved in STEM, and that got him kind of hooked into it as well. And he started off really doing more audio engineering. So each of those events from the different big names in the concerts he was talking about, he had a lot of lessons learned and like after actions information that came out of those. And he weaved those lessons learned from those different audio engineering events into different things that you should do inside of like incident response where he works now. So it was a massively fascinating journey through electronics and systems and culture and society from like 1958 to today. So really, really interesting. I love it when some of the people who came before are able to relay some of the lessons learned that they had. One of my favorite of those by far, I had the opportunity to listen to Cliff Stoll, the guy who wrote The Cuckoo's Nest, which is kind of a classic book for people in the cyber world. And to hear those things firsthand about how he was able to see these different people. I think in his case, a German guy coming in over his modem, and he's working in this physics lab, and how he handled that, and the data rates they're talking about. Or you always pick up something interesting, like, oh, that's what a TTY line means, or oh, that's interesting that they only had that much space to contend with, and they were able to produce these big concerts and events. So yeah, very very cool. During some time I was over in England, I was able to take a trip over to Bletchley Park, where all of the code breaking happened during World War II, and that was a lot of fun to visit. The similar type of situation too, where they have the Museum of Computing there as well, so you're able to actually interact with some of those computers from back in the day, and they have a big working Bamba and a big working computer that's running, that ticker tape style compute programs and things like that, which don't have transistors. They've got the big vacuum tubes. You can feel the heat coming off of the back. It's just a whole other dimension to learning about it versus just reading about it in a book or something like that alone. But shout out to Wayne Schwartau. I'm not sure if I'm butchering that. I hope not, but um, that was very cool, and I was happy to see that one. And then the final one, which probably gets us into a topic that's going to happen or occur on here more and more since it's something we're kind of working with now, is that there's an emulation driven reverse engineering one by a person named Atlas. He talks about something that's really close to us. It's like when you're reverse engineering, how do you get the computer to do more of the hard work for you so you can get to the fun stuff? Because it is a
Hmm.
total brain drain standard assembly and trying to track what it's doing and run some test value in your mind through some function and be like, okay, now it's returning this pointer to this thing, but I have no idea how it got there or what that thing is. Man, it'd be really nice to do this dynamically. So the guy Atlas, he had some work. He had some interesting work. I looked up some of his other stuff with VM escaping and messing around with RFCat and doing stuff on vehicles. But he's also a core dev on a project that I think is pretty cool called Vivisect. So instead of doing like full on system emulation, so imagine that you really wanted to be able to emulate all of your peripherals and do things accurately. It's not that. It's kind of more in the ARM, I'm sorry, not ARM, Capstone slash Unicorn style, emulation where you're only wanting to do partial emulation. So all you really are trying to do is you're keeping track of registers and memory, right? And then you're implementing some type of thing that's like an instruction that's going to act on the registers and memory that would, hopefully faithfully in the same way that would happen for the system under test that you're messing with. But obviously that's not always possible. Quick sidebar on that. Do you remember that guy's YouTube channel, Robert Baruch or Barrick?
I do.
Uh, awesome channel, which I'll link in the show notes. But he has a cool one where he builds a CPU inside of an FPGA so he could play this game called Zork. And I love that somebody with that kind of brain power and time, the whole, point of the endeavor was not necessarily to do anything highbrow or highfalutin or anything other than to be able to play an old game and have fun along the way. That's fun to me. But he ends up using. He had something else in that video that was interesting to me that he talked about, where he's talking about in comparison the different hardware descriptor languages, wherein he described VHDL is Ada-like, Verilog is C-like, and System Verilog is C++-like. I thought that was fascinating, a fascinating analogy. Um, what other things does he have on his channel that are interesting? There's a bunch.
Just the whole channel, right? Just stop and go watch the whole channel right now before you finish this.
Smash that like and subscribe
It'll
button.
right. It'll take you maybe a year or two, but it'll be totally worth it.
per
Um,
per video.
I honestly, I just love everything on his. Yeah, maybe. I love everything on that dude's YouTube channel. Like, I don't know. I go back and still watch some of it, although he hasn't published a video in about a year, unfortunately.
And that's a shame.
Pretty much.
what was the one? It's like 5 minutes, and you know which one I'm talking about? I think it might have been the first one that we had talked to each other about because neither one of us is in that whole John McMaster state of actually decapping, ICs and looking at the dies and stuff like that.
So I think the one you might be talking about is decapsulating a plastic package IC with hot sulfuric acid.
Yes.
Uh,
Yep.
it's it's about 12 minutes, but yeah, it's a good one, but also it's really dangerous.
I think I'm okay with that. Well,
I am for myself, but I have too many kids and not enough space for that sort of business. You know what I mean?
yes.
So
Yeah.
I,
I
I kind of run it there.
I love those videos though where somebody talks about their process and their flow. There was another one that
Hmm.
a friend had shared in chat recently talking about how kind of one of the bigger names out there in the programming world had shared their setup for how they do forward programming. And man, if you have somebody who has those years and years of experience doing something, they're taking the time to relay that to you. Run and listen closely because you're going to pick up something I think that's good. In the case of like Robert's channel or Rob's channel, I think he refers to himself as Rob a lot in it. Um, just the amount of detail that he pours into every second of it is like you'll watch 10 seconds worth and you're like, man, there's a lot to decompress just from this 10 seconds worth. And the one that I'm talking about, I think that he has a big project where he's going and decapping old logic chips, and he has a whole process for opening them, cataloging them. He even has like a 2 axis or 3 axis CNC to take high resolution pictures of them, which he then stitches together and then uses a photo editing program to mark up which ones are what for the logic gates. And then he puts that all out there on this wiki that he has for free. Just an incredible project. Another, wish list guest for the show. I think we should probably at some point start reaching out to people if we want them. It's scary. Who's going to be our first?
I don't know.
In any event, though, so yeah, popping the stack back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier. So this emulation-driven reverse engineering by Atlas, he gets down into doing partial system emulation, which had reminded me of Robert's channel. But the way that he does that goes into a wrapper that he created for Vivisect called Ninja Emu, and it provides kind of more of that interactive debugging like UI as well as like a fake OS kernel to support hooked functions and like a heap like thing and a file system like thing and a registry like thing so that you can really try to get as much as possible into getting good answers out of doing dynamic testing. And man, do I love me some dynamic testing versus static if it's possible. I mean, you can get into a chicken and egg situation where you're like, well, what type of info is coming over these sensors to this thing? I don't know. So when I'm running through this function, is it really representative of what it is that I want to see? Well, I don't know, but I do know how data gets transformed when I push it in. So I think that any type of tooling that I see, I'm probably on that front for dynamic testing. I'm probably going to play around with and see how much of a pain it is to set up. If I run into that same problem that I brought up at the beginning of the show, or I'm 20 different, installs deep and just don't want to spend half a day trying to install, all of these other support things just for a 20K line program. But that one's worth checking out. I'll share that one out in the show notes as well. Dynamic testing, man. What are your thoughts?
I love dynamic testing. I really get frustrated with just static testing. I have a pretty big problem um, with my brain being like extra contextual, right? Like I have to be in context for things. So um, just kind of adding that context that dynamic testing allows you to do is pretty much perfect for me. There's no time that I prefer static testing over dynamic testing, unless I guess you're looking for something start the thing up in the wrong configuration. Is it going to kill itself or anything? Um, that can be problematic, But by and large, nah. Let's turn it on and see what's passing between where, and then what we can make of that in the dynamic testing and find out and trace it through.
Yeah, it's all
That's
about
pretty
that
much where
quick
I'm going.
triage. Get to quick triage. Where is the thing that I care about that's important? How do I get there as quick as humanly possible? Because I personally have spent, literally a month in one case, uh, REing some code from a DSP just to find out that I had been REing some mouth functions. And I was like, oh man, was I angry at the end of all of that? Maybe angry is not the right word. It was a combination of feelings. There's probably some 68 character German word which encapsulates exactly what I was feeling, but man, dynamic testing for the win, in my opinion. But
Definitely.
yeah, that though is pretty much a wrap up of the stuff from DEF CON 30. I think that there's a chance we may possibly be going to some other ones, maybe not here in the rest of the upcoming year, but both you and I are very busy people, so we'll see if any of that actually kind of matriculates out. Hopefully it does. Were there any topics that you wanted to throw out there?
I don't think so. And if there were at the beginning, I feel like my stomach is probably starting to override that point.
Oh yeah, we're sitting at an
Um,
hour 30, man. We should probably wrap things up. Um, yeah, so for DEF CON 30, the wrap up here is talked about the good, talked about the bad, and talked about the ugly, and some talks. Not too sure. We haven't really tabletopped what we're going to talk about for the next one, but I feel like if we can keep this going at like a weekly stride, that would be pretty awesome. We'll see if life pops up in the way to sit us down from that. Hopefully not, but yeah, this was episode 1, DEF CON 30. You have any closing thoughts or remarks?
I don't really think so. Do dynamic testing instead of static testing.
Dynamic over static. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next one. Bye.
repp.show. Nerd Talk IO.